Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. We are diving straight into the deep end today. We're unpacking a massive stack of recently declassified government documents to figure out exactly how US agencies investigate election security. We've taken thousands of pages of raw intelligence and on-the-ground field reports, and we're distilling them all down. Our goal? To give you a totally clear, objective look at the threat matrix surrounding our democratic processes. No spin, just the facts. So here's our roadmap for the breakdown. First, we're looking at FBI investigations into domestic voter registration. Then we'll see how DHS handles non-citizen registration data. After that, we're zooming out to look at Chinese cyber espionage. And finally, we'll wrap up with the CIA's technology assessments on Venezuela. Let's get right into it.
All right, Part 1, FBI voter registration investigations. We are starting right at the ground level with a major case study out of Michigan.
Now, this timeline of the Muskegon investigation is a perfect example of just how meticulous and honestly how slow the FBI's process can be. Back in October of 2020, local clerks flagged some highly suspicious voter registration packages. That single tip sparked a massive probe. But look at this gap here. It wasn't until December 2023, a full 3 years later, that federal special agents were actually sitting down doing in-person interviews with the street-level canvassers. And the case wasn't officially closed until September 2025. It really goes to show just how deliberately the wheels of federal law enforcement turn when they're auditing registration drives. And what they found during those interviews really flipped the script. See, the initial suspicion was that these canvassers were getting paid per registration, which obviously creates this huge financial incentive to forge documents. But the official FBI interview records, known as FD-302 forms, told a totally different story. The canvassers explicitly stated they were paid hourly, usually on reloadable Visa cards, and they absolutely did not forge signatures. In fact, they claimed they didn't alter anything, even when they spotted weird anomalies in the paperwork themselves.
So the FBI initially treated this as a full-blown, sensitive investigative matter. They were working directly with the DOJ's public integrity section, tracking cell phones, executing search warrants, digging through payroll data, the whole shebang. But after exhausting literally every lead, the final conclusion was surprisingly quiet. The U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan and the FBI closed the case. They found zero evidence of a federal criminal violation or any intentional false submissions designed to illegally establish voting rights.
Okay, moving on to Part 2, DHS and non-citizen registration. While the FBI handles that domestic fraud side of things, the Department of Homeland Security is busy monitoring demographic eligibility using their SAVE system. And their national security summaries reported a pretty staggering number. Over 250,000 non-citizens were found to be illegally registered to vote. And that was just across the 4 initial states where they reviewed public data files. This massive data point was basically the catalyst that pushed DHS to aggressively expand its coordination with state election officials. They started utilizing federal databases to actively identify and remove ineligible registrants to protect the integrity of the vote. And you can see how this plays out when proactive states actually integrate with the DHS SAVE system, which stands for Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements. It allows them to aggressively scrub their voter rolls. Take a look at these metrics. Texas, for instance, used the system to flag over 111,000 deceased individuals and over 2,200 non-citizens. It provides a really clinical, data-driven perspective on the sheer amount of ongoing daily maintenance required to keep massive state voter databases accurate. To put the scale of this into perspective, by June 2026, 25 different states had processed more than 68 million registration records through this enhanced SAVE system. Think about that for a second. That is literally half the country running these massive, complex data matching operations just to ensure voter eligibility. It's a monumental logistical undertaking, to say the least. All right, let's shift gears for Part 3, Chinese cyber espionage. We're moving from domestic records over to international cyber threats, specifically diving into highly classified CIA assessments of Chinese intelligence operations targeting the U.S. What we're looking at here is a declassified CIA World Intelligence Review, or WIRE memo, from the summer of 2020. It lays out exactly how Chinese state-sponsored actors were actively probing U.S. presidential campaigns. Now, the intelligence community assessed that China wasn't necessarily trying to hack in and flip votes. Instead, they were conducting extensive cyber espionage. They wanted to gather intelligence on policy positions and, crucially, map out network vulnerabilities for potential future operations. Let's walk through the methodology used by the cyber group known as APT31, because it is highly sophisticated. This was not your average spam folder junk. Step 1.
They sent highly targeted spear phishing emails to the personal Gmail accounts of campaign staffers. But step 2 is where it gets really scary. The targets didn't even have to click a malicious link. Nope. Just opening the email triggered hidden tracking pixels that sent metadata straight back to the Chinese operators, confirming the account was active and logging their device info. Then, in step 3, APT31 used all that data to map out the campaign's entire network architecture for incredibly targeted follow-up attacks. And the PRC wasn't just going after campaign staff either. They were targeting everyday voters. Another declassified intelligence memo showed that the PRC was actively sweeping up voter registration data from 18 different U.S. states. They were building these massive databases of personally identifiable information. We're talking names, dates of birth, home addresses, party affiliations, and historical voting records. That is an absolute treasure trove of personal data that could be weaponized for incredibly detailed public opinion manipulation. Finally, let's pivot to part 4, Venezuelan technology assessments. We are capping this off by examining the CIA's historical intelligence reporting on Venezuelan electronic voting manipulation capabilities. But before we get into the findings, we really need to understand the methodology behind them. Back in 2013, the CIA conducted what they call a devil's advocacy report. This is a very specific analytic exercise where they intentionally map out a plausible worst-case scenario, basically asking, theoretically, how could large-scale electronic fraud happen without being detected? It is absolutely crucial to remember that this was an exercise to test vulnerabilities in centralized networks. It was expressly not a definitive finding of fact that this kind of fraud actually took place. So the CIA's baseline assessment came with some very strict analytic caveats. While their intelligence did suggest that Venezuelan officials had a sustained interest in manipulating their own domestic elections, using specialized tricks like virtual machine replication, the CIA concluded that neither the Venezuelan government nor the technology companies involved had the access required to pull that off elsewhere. They didn't have the physical machine security, the paper receipts, or the audit controls to manipulate an election outside of Venezuela. The CIA drew a very hard, distinct line between localized foreign actions and international capabilities. So, to wrap this explainer up, just take a second to consider the sheer, massive complexity of everything we've just covered. We've seen how the FBI meticulously investigates boots on the ground, how DHS monitors staggering federal databases, and how the CIA tracks elite foreign cyber units and tests theoretical hardware vulnerabilities. It's like a giant, ever-shifting puzzle. The big question moving forward isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about how these overlapping agencies will adapt and evolve to defend the democratic process in future elections. Thanks for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.